Experienced players will have a lot to offer the unquestionably massive addition to the Smash community upon Ultimate's release. There will be gaggles of new players dogpiling experienced players for guidance. This is all well and good, par for the course. But if I've learned one thing in my many years of pursuing wildly different interests and passions, and looking to my idols in the process for guidance, it's that a person's mastery of a subject does not guarantee their ability to communicate that subject, but those two very different skills are frequently lumped together. As a matter of fact, this very fact is a large part of my initial motivation for this very series. I know pretty well what it's like to grope in the dark on well-meaning but ultimately bad or poorly conveyed advice. If you've ever had a bad college professor or a bad teacher, then you'll know right away what I mean. Getting better at Smash, or really any fighting game or thing in general for that matter, is complicated and nuanced, if it is indeed worth getting good at the first place. Chances are excellent that you're not in a constant state of this strange gestalt hyper-awareness where you explicitly and lucidly understand every single thing that you do. And if you've achieved any level of competence in anything, you probably look back to before you mastered whatever skills you mastered and think, oh, well, gee whiz, what was all the fuss about? And that's probably because a lot of the details you labored over at one point were sussed out through trial and error without you realizing it. In other words, intuition took the wheel, and the details that once mattered to past you got left to the wayside of future you as concepts began to congeal into a single, streamlined, uniform mass. Compare this concept to lossy compression with JPEG files. Once you ascend to a new level of understanding and unify all these concepts and details, a nice cohesive image pops out the other end. But a lot of information is lost, and the exact details of how that image came to be aren't clear, and you may have to fudge things a bit. But those details matter a lot to newer players. Suffice it to say, many of us fail to appreciate the finer points of things we once labored over ourselves, and when this kind of oversimplification occurs, as a more experienced player is communicating advice to someone lower on the food chain, at worst it'll mislead that person, at best it'll confuse and frustrate them. This personally describes my experience when I started out composing music. Motoi Sakuraba of Tales, Dark Souls, and Star Ocean fame, whom I'm sure I've mentioned at least once in one of my prior videos, is my musical hero. It's not up for debate whether the guy knows with galaxy brain precision what he's doing, but as I discovered as I was obsessively reading interviews with him for Musical Insight nearly a decade ago, his ability to communicate what he clearly knows completely and utterly betrays what he actually does know. Because of his oversimplifications, I, taking his word as gospel, was led into a pretty wrong way of thinking. This being said, as I studied his music more and more, I found something much different from what he had said. He said that he didn't know music theory, but he very clearly did. So was he lying? Probably not. I think a more likely explanation is that he simply miscommunicated or oversimplified, whatever you want to call it. And because of that, I spent a long time convinced that I had no need to understand music theory to compose like him. But I came to an important realization because of this. There is not a one-to-one correspondence, necessarily, between mastery of a skill and the ability to communicate about that skill. Now, change the backdrop a little here to Smash, and the same could be said of all the times I've seen newer players' eyes just glaze over as someone suffocated them with informational overload and unfamiliar terms, or worse, someone they depended on or looked up to unintentionally misled them with oversimplifications. The problem is simply that beginners don't realize that their idols are fallible, and the idols in question aren't necessarily aware that they may be trivializing a lot of important information, nor of the consequences of doing so. So, for the advice givers, here are two questions I encourage you to ask before giving advice. The first, how many assumptions are you making about what the person knows? I've witnessed a 15-year-old child playing in their first tournament on a 3DS being told things like, you can punish that F-smash with a fade-back bear. Remember, you are essentially speaking a foreign language to new players, and you need to adjust the way you communicate to reflect that, unless you're just conducting a test for echo. Second of which, and arguably the most important, how many questions does your advice beg? Just play good players. Keep practicing. Watch videos. Practice movement. Take a moment to appreciate just how many implicit questions may be embedded in what you're saying. For instance, if you fall into the just play good players advice crowd, consider how many questions are begged by what you've just said. Practice with whom? For how long? How to practice? With how many different people? What to practice? If you can't pinpoint these finer details, that's fine, but at least be forthcoming and make that clear to the person you're advising. There's an old saying, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with bullshit. And the latter is an unfortunate tactic of choice to save face when we can't cough up a convincing answer. Now, for the advice takers, i.e. the new players, it's important to know good question asking strategies to hopefully get better advice and prompt the advice giver to explain those hidden questions in their advice that they may take as given. Why is just as important to ask as how and what. Sometimes the best way to understand why something is the way it is to ask why it isn't another way. For example, why does a chair have 4 legs? There are 2 ways to approach this question, generally speaking. The factual way, to ask why the chair has 4 legs, that is, the original question, and the counterfactual, to ask why it doesn't have 3. Now, is this to say the burden is on top players to psychically transmit their thoughts to other people? No way. Is this to say you should never listen to top players or more experienced players? Definitely not. And it would be an ironic twist of fate if a video about communicating ideas miscommunicated such a central point. Rather, my intended message is twofold. The first leg is that top players and those who guide the new generation of players should be deliberate about not trivializing important details and recognizing the kinds of questions whose answer your advice presupposes. That is, practice with good people presupposes you've already answered like 15 questions a person might have about what exactly you mean by practice with good people. The second leg is that the new generation must understand that expertise in Smash and expertise in communicating complex, nuanced ideas are not the same thing, and that many new players might spare themselves a lot of headache by not treating the words of their seniors as guide rather than gospel, unless, of course, their advice does prove consistently fruitful. Newer players for whom Smash is their first serious attempt at getting good at something may not realize that expertise and communication are different things, and they may lack the confidence without being told otherwise to question the wisdom of those they perceive to be authorities. You will know a tree by its fruits. You will know good advice when it makes sense and when it works. Having made that as clear as I think I can at this point, I think it's coming time for me to put this video to bed. To no one's surprise, I hope, at least at this point, I'm very grateful, as always, to everyone who takes time to hear my thoughts, and all the more so to those who hopefully will continue to do so in the future. I apologize to those who are looking forward to the video I said I'd release about practicing solo in my last video, but as usually is the case with me, while writing for that video, ideas sort of morphed into other ideas, and an entirely new video was born in the process. But I'll still try to hammer that one out before too long. With that said, I have many more videos on their way out, and they should be ready for your viewing displeasure around the time that Ultimate drops, so I hope you'll look forward to them. If you know a new player or someone who plans on picking up Ultimate who could stand to hear this, I encourage you to share this video with them. If you're new to my channel and did in fact enjoy this video, or feel somehow enriched for having seen it, I encourage you to subscribe by hitting the subscribe with notifications button somewhere down there. Knowing I'm reaching more and more people gives me much needed encouragement to keep going with SmashConceptions.